in Bangkok, Thailand. Here in Singapore, the government has defended its new contempt law, which rights campaigners say could threaten freedom of speech. Singapore's Home Affairs Minister said the bill did not seek to expand the powers of the current contempt of court law, but merely aimed to clarify it. And under the new law, offenders could be fined up to 75,000 US dollars. That's 100,000 Singapore dollars, and jailed for up to 3 years. With me now in our Singapore studios to discuss this new law is Swee Yiseong, a lawyer at the Harry Elias Partnership Singapore, and PJ Thum, head of the Southeast Asia program at the University of Oxford. Gentlemen, welcome to Newsday. All right, let's start off with you, Mr. Swee. Do you think that this bill will shackle freedom of speech?
No, I don't think so. The minister, in his speech to Parliament, made it clear that what he's actually trying to proscribe are concerted media campaigns that try to shape the outcome of a case. But anything beyond this category is permissible. So, for instance, if the media runs a very concerted campaign saying that someone should be convicted or let go, that might amount to contempt. But anything beyond that level, say a person sitting in his living room commenting on a case, that's not contempt.
So, PJ, he says it will not shackle freedom of speech. So why are you against this new law?
Well, you see, the implications of the new law are not for the guilty, right? Yiseong is totally correct that it does codify what is already on the books. But there is one fundamental change. It turns the law from a non-seizable to a seizable offense. And that has severe implications for the innocent. It changes the nature of their relationship. The government, the Attorney General, has been more aggressively pursuing cases of contempt in recent years. And that means that for activists who are accused of being in contempt of court, they would be subject to arrest, to have their home searched, to have their belongings seized, to undergo a lengthy interrogation before going to court and maybe accruing a lot of costs. You see, and this is, in the past, people who have undergone that process have been let off with a warning or had the charges dropped, but now they will undergo a very lengthy and difficult process. And
even if you rant on social media, the authorities can go to your home and take you away.
In a sense, but I think it's only in the most serious of cases that the AGC will exercise its powers. I have full respect for the Singapore police and the prosecutors. I think they act in the public interest, and I think they will weigh the seriousness of any alleged offense that is committed. But I mean, as a defense lawyer myself, I think I'm in full agreement with PJ. I think the fact that contempt is an arrestable offense makes it quite serious, but as a defense lawyer, I think any defense lawyer will do their best to get whoever is remanded out on bail or released as soon as possible.
And PJ, according to the government, this will not basically change or expand the current contempt of court practices and only aims to clarify them. And this is basically aimed at protecting the ordinary citizens.
Oh, yes, that's fine. It's really important to protect our ordinary citizens. It is really important that the integrity of our court process be upheld. But it also indicates how the problematic nature of how contempt of court has been used and pursued in Singapore. There have been many activists who have been slapped with accusation, of contempt of court, and later, as I mentioned, let off, but only after a lengthy process. And so this is going to make life very difficult. So the ramifications are not for the guilty, but for the innocent, especially if you're innocent. That's why you should be worried about this law.
Is the penalty too steep? 100,000 Singapore dollars and up to 3 years in prison, Mr. Swee?
Well, to be perfectly fair to the law as it stands, this is the maximum offense, and it's only when the offense is committed, when the High Court or the Court of Appeal decides on such an offense. So this is the maximum. It doesn't mean a court will always impose such a fine. And I think the majority of the cases will be dealt with in the state courts of Singapore, which is the first instance court, and there the maximum fine and jail term are much lower. And again, it's up to the judge to decide, and I don't think any judge would immediately impose the maximum.
Could this also mean that the government could clamp down even further and be more restrictive on the media?
In a sense, if the media is engaging in some sort of concerted attempt at influencing a trial, then yes. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Joanne Yeats case in the UK about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I think the UK viewers would be familiar about this. Basically, the Sun and the Daily Mirror ran a media campaign when a man was arrested. Even they said he was a murder suspect, even though actually he was completely innocent. They destroyed his reputation completely. They ran articles implying he was a pedophile, had stalkerish tendencies. So I think what the minister wants to prevent is this sort of circus from happening. So in terms of the media, I think Singapore's mass media is perfectly responsible, even our social media. So if they stay within the bounds, there's nothing to fear, really.
PJ, is this law is done and dusted? Can it still be amended going forward?
Well, I mean, in theory, any law can be amended. But what really worries me is the history of the context of increasing arbitrary executive power in Singapore and the ability of the government to go after freedom of speech and to severely curtail freedom of speech. In the past few years, we've seen a whole raft of amendments and new laws that give the government power to clamp down on freedom of speech. And this trend is continuing, and it's very worrying. You know, as Thomas Paine said, a government which has arbitrary power over its people, right? As long as a government has arbitrary power over its people, the people are not free because their lives depend on the goodwill of the government. So as long as that exists, you're still a slave.
So, Mr. Swee, let's try to compare this with the UK. How does this contempt of court differ from what happens in the UK?
Well, if you just look at the plain wording, it seems different. But if you listen to what the minister said in Parliament, actually we're not so far apart. So the UK test is what they call, I believe, a substantial risk of serious prejudice. Singapore is a real risk. But the Joanne Yeats case, which I mentioned, Christopher Jeffries, that was decided in the context of the UK Contempt of Court Act. And according to what the minister says, apparently that is what the Singapore test is. So really, we're not so far apart.
All right, gentlemen, we would like to thank you for joining us on Newsday and clarifying this contempt of this new contempt law issue. Thank you so much for joining us. Swee, Yi Seong, and PJ Tum. And we'll be having the government response to this story in the next hour right here on Newsday. Christopher De Souza is a member of parliament here in Singapore as well as a lawyer. That's at 2300 GMT.